This is actually organised crime. This is intelligent people. I'm not saying that we're not. That are actually planning to do this, and they're planning it weeks, months in advance, and they're watching and they're waiting, and it's actually what we would probably perceive, as in the criminal world, it's worth doing. It's something that people invest a lot of time to do.
Without secure parking, we will continue to be vulnerable to attack. Only with secure parking will we reduce that.
I remember when I was an operator that I got done in somewhere in the northwest, and I just started a new operation literally on the Friday, and we'd got a temporary security, and it was for a very famous aerosol manufacturer. And I had 6 preloaded trailers sat in the yard, and 4 of them ended up on Liverpool docks empty within 2 hours.
That image of a larger company just absorbing it as a loss, just passing an insurer, not even then bothering to pass it to police, that has increased this perception that freight crime is always victimless.
Certainly with the people, that do this type of behaviour and basically organised crime, there will always be 1 or 2 steps in front of you, more of your area of expertise than mine, Nigel. But that's my impression, and you'll never beat them, and so it's about minimising, and preventing as much as you can, but also try to get 1 step in front of them.
But if everybody used a system, you would be able to see what all the freight crime was.
Yeah.
So there are 2 ways of looking at it. If everybody used it and there wasn't any freight crime, you could encourage people into this industry, which is a good industry, and a lot of people make a good living out of it.
Welcome to this edition of the podcast. Today we're going to talk about freight crime, what it is, how it's evolving, what is the real cost of the industry. Well, I'm joined by Nigel, Chris and Ashton, who I'll in a minute just ask them to introduce themselves, and we're going to go through a series of questions to talk about this issue, which I would describe as one of the biggest challenges to the industry in a number of ways, and one that's not recognised actually in some cases, which is a growing concern. So, without further ado, Nigel, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nigel Collins. I'm a retired Detective Chief Inspector, and I work in the National Vehicle Crime Intelligence Service Freight Desk, and I'm the Freight Manager. I work with Mike Dorber, Angie Dawson, who's a new member of the team from Amazon, Terry Egan, who's come from the Department for Transport, and Rose and Lauren, who are analysts and administrators. So we focus on collating the data and bridging the gap between policing and industry.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Chris?
I'm Chris Holloway, driver, transport manager, logistics manager, and the owner and founder of the motorway body system, which basically is the bridge between freight crime and the driver, really, and the haulier. We map the freight crime map for NAVSIS, and we enable drivers to report freight crime through the app to the hauliers and anybody else in the industry who needs it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And the marathon runner. Don't forget the marathon runner, very important.
Oh, I am a marathon runner, yes. I am a marathon runner as well, yeah.
Ashton?
Thanks. I'm Ashton Cull. I'm Senior Public Affairs Lead for the Road Haulage Association. I'm also Chair of the RHA Freight Crime and Security Forum. Been covering and campaigning on the issues of freight crime, talking to members and on their behalf, liaising with the guys to my left and those in government for about the last 4 years now.
Okay, thanks, Ashton. So let's start with the first question, really, which is for all of you. We'll do it in a very structured way, rather than a random way. What is freight crime? How is it currently defined? What type of offence does it fall under? Because there's been some challenges around that, I think, which I'll let you talk to, if that's all right, Nigel, to start with. Why it remains a significant issue to the road transport industry? Probably, Chris, if you want to touch on that as well from a motorway body perspective, bring that. Right. But the actual impact it has on this industry. So, what's it all about, freight crime? Why is it important? And how do we actually define it? Nigel, would you like to? Please?
As you say, Rich, it's a difficult one to define because it encompasses so many different crime types. Conventionally, it's been classed as goods in transit over 7.5 tons, but there's multiple offences that are included within that definition. And discussions are taking place whether it should change and it should encompass the whole of the supply chain problem. But it encompasses a number of different offences. At its most extreme, it is robbery and the subjection of drivers and staff being subjected to violence and the threat of violence in order to steal the goods. And then there's the predominant crime type is curtain slashing to steal those goods, and then there's bulk cropping offences, thefts of preloaded trailers, theft of the trailers themselves, and we're seeing a crime emergence of rollover theft, which will be goods in transit going along the road and motorway at high speeds per hour, and being attacked while it's in transit at in excess of 50 miles an hour. But what we are also seeing an emerging trend, which is very common in Europe and wider worldwide, is cybercrime and fraud. And that emergence of those crime types with phishing attacks, fraud, bogus collections, that is something that we're monitoring closely because it's very common in Europe and America, and we are seeing instances of that in the UK. So it is evolving. Criminals are becoming more sophisticated, and this is very much organised crime at its highest.
You just led me to that point. You just touched on it. So this is actually organised crime. This is intelligent people. I'm not saying that we're not. That are actually planning to do this, and they're planning it weeks, months in advance, and they're watching and they're waiting, and it's actually what we would probably perceive, as in the criminal world, it's worth doing. It's something that people invest a lot of time to do.
That's right. It's low risk because it is effectively a theft from a motor vehicle, but it's high reward. We're having £1 million loads being stolen, and it's a very difficult crime type to investigate because it'll be happening in different forces up and down the country, and that'll be a complex conspiracy to investigate. So whilst we know a lot of the information, we do a lot of intelligence analysis, we've got a good understanding of the organised crime groups that are involved. Actually bringing them to justice is very difficult, and then the outcomes are very low risk because what the fake crime bill is, in partnership with the RHA, taking it with Rachel Taylor to Parliament, it's about increasing the severity of sentencing for those committing those crimes.
Perfect. And we've just about done all my questions in one now, which is great, Nigel, but we'll come back from one part. So we'll jump around a little bit. So Ashton, talk to me about the Freight Crime Bill and what is it that we as an industry, led by Navis, I would say, on this, which do a great job, you're actually asking for.
I do. Yeah, so this is through Rachel Taylor, who's the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freight and Logistics, which we, the RHA, is the secretariat for, so we supported this for many years. Rachel's been a great ally for the industry in Parliament. She's got a lot of people employed in her constituency that are employed by the freight and logistics industry, so it speaks to their heart and to their interests as well. Her constituency, North Warwickshire, is right in the centre of the Golden Triangle. So really strategically important for the industry, but also one of the areas of highest crime. So it's really great she's there to help take action on this. So the Freight Crime Bill, really lucky you had this. You got the chance to bring a bill forward in Parliament. Not every MP gets the chance. It's a raffle, essentially. You pick by ballot, and she chose that opportunity to focus on freight crime. So we're talking there, it's about improving the recording, improving the reporting of freight crime, having that dedicated coding so you can actually see when you interrogate the police computers how many freight crime incidents there are and where they are. Because at the minute, a lot of the time, they recorded it, as Nigel said, recorded as theft from a motor vehicle, that puts the theft of £1 million worth of high-tech goods that's been planned and thought out and specifically targeted. I say these criminals do know what's moving, when it's moving, and where it's most at risk. It puts those kind of crimes alongside the opportunistic theft of a purse from somebody's personal vehicle or from a theft on a passenger seat. It's really hard to be able to get the clearest picture of what's going on with freight crime when we don't have that code. And yes, also a big part of this is making sure that it is recognising as an aggravated offence when somebody is targeting freight vehicles and targeting the supply chain, the damage that causes to the industry and the wider economy that relies on the logistics industry. It's really important to make sure that the crime is treated as severely as the impact that it has on everybody who is affected by it. So that's what we're asking for as part of the Freight Crime Bill.
So just be very clear for the listeners. The Freight Crime Bill is asking for classification.
Yeah, better classification code, and a little bit stricter sentencing, exactly.
Okay. And as a side, we're asking for more resource to be put into this area to support the great work that these guys are doing.
Yeah. And so they do great work, but at the minute, so NAVSIS, a lot of their funding, and almost all of it, I think, comes entirely from the industry. I can't think of many other victims of crime like it is the freight logistics industry that have to pay for their own policing.
When I remember when I was an operator, it wasn't funny, that wasn't a snigger, he can edit that out. Yeah, I can. I remember when I was an operator that I got done in somewhere in the northwest, and I just started a new operation literally on the Friday, and we'd got a temporary security, and it was for a very famous aerosol manufacturer. And I had 6 preloaded trailers sat in the yard, and 4 of them ended up on Liverpool docks empty within 2 hours. And they actually drove in with paperwork, picked it up, and off they went. And rather touchingly, and this you can leave this bit if you want, they actually left me a dead rat on one of the forklift trucks that they used to load some of the pallets with. Yeah, because now that was 2004. And that's 21 years ago. So this is something, and back in those days, I'm not sure if that's Sister's Exits, but back in those days, we never even got a visit, because it was just one of those things, So it really shows that it's been there for a long time, but as technology moves forward, Chris, as technology moves forward, as people become more and more focused on making a margin and, robbery, frankly, whether it be the cyber type or the good old-fashioned, I won't say it's good, but it's old-fashioned way of just taking a trailer. What does this mean to a driver? What does this mean to safe, secure parking areas? What do we need to do as an industry to really start thinking about that? Big question, that, but as a driver...
I was going to say, set me off nice and mildly. What it means to a driver, I've discussed this loads of times with lots of different people. It's a strange feeling when I, as a driver, have had a diesel stolen in the past, and I felt guilty that it had happened to me, which was an odd feeling because there was nothing, like say you discuss organised crime, you discuss organised freight theft. This wasn't organised at all. This was me, in fairness, I was parked in a lay-by just overnight, just on my own, and had, I say, diesel stolen. And to this day, for people who I were working for at the time, still don't know that I just went back to the fuel bunker on site and filled it up full of diesel because I didn't want to get in trouble for something that wasn't my fault, essentially. There's also the flip side to it of when somebody is being broken into, that if I'm lying in my boxer shorts on the bunk, having a snooze, and I hear somebody rattling around on the back of the trailer or the truck, I'm really in no position to get out and start trying to sort of solve that problem. There are other things that we could do and looking at doing to raise that alarm then, rather than actually putting the driver at risk. But that's exactly what it does. So the conversation about facilities is a separate one. But what we as a collective are trying to do is sort of show drivers where the set places are that aren't safe to park, and sort of divert them and guide them into the facilities, and hopefully the facilities, when you get there, aren't full. They are open and they are providing what the drivers need. I can't think of what was the second part of the
come
question.
back to it because you just give me another question there. So we're just going to move to Nigel for a quick comment and then come back to you. So is there such a thing as a safe area to park in your experience?
Well, the Department for Trade and Safer Parking, so Park Mark Freight, that is the industry standard, together with the TAPA, industry standard for safe, secure parking. So there's a difference between safe parking and secure parking. There's been a slow uptake within the UK for accredited secure parking sites, and NAVSIS and the trade associations, including the RHA, are committed to improving that. Because without secure parking, we will continue to be vulnerable to attack. Only with secure parking will we reduce that, and the cooperation of all partners. So when the most secure way of transporting goods is from secure to secure. There are vulnerabilities in that, but when a driver is arriving at his final destination and being asked to wait in an insecure area, that is an obvious vulnerability, and the criminals know where that is. And so by working together with the depots and ensuring that is reduced, we reduce the risk. So it's in all our interests to promote secure parking, and there is industry standards which are not expensive. The police will work with sites to design out crime and those industry standards, and that will reduce the risk to drivers and the industry and the community. And ultimately, Rich, it's about making sure the drivers are safe.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to come back to that, Banks. Again, when I used to run operations, I had a number of vehicles that were subject to vehicle crime, and it was always the driver for me. I had one driver that was pulled out of his cab with a bunch of guys who had a baseball bat in their hand, and that is something that'll leave him for the rest of his life. And I'm not surprised. And that is, when you go to work to do your job, it's our job as an industry to make sure that doesn't happen.
And it's getting those messages and support to those drivers.
That's it. Going back to you, Chris, and this smart, you can say no, we'll move across. So I look at, Motorway Buddy as being, I've got it on my phone actually, as being one way that we can, help highlight where the safer areas are to park, shall we say. But what other technology do you think we can use that can help us on this journey other than what's in place now?
Wowzers. I don't really know. There's sat navs. It's a good question. I'm thinking sort of like, I don't really know. There's few and far between, to be perfectly honest with you, off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of you could probably go down the routes of Google Maps, but it won't tell you where it's safe. It'll tell you where these things are. It won't. There's no real kind of emergency button. There aren't really any other. If I'm off the top of my head, I can't think. I suppose that's why I came up with the idea in the first place. If there was lots of sort of solutions to these problems for drivers, then I wouldn't have really thought about it in the first place. I don't suppose I'd have used a off-the-shelf product that was already there. That's made me think. Well done.
But I think
Maybe swat a little, but
no, I think the fight isn't. It shouldn't. I mean, I invite Nigel and Ashton to comment on it, but I don't think there is that much more we can do other than, and I think the basics we've never done with this, and it's not the people on this table, and it's what we're asking to do now is to get it clearly identified so we understand what the issue is. Invest in supporting and resolving that issue. Because I think we've teched out on this one to some degree. We can highlight whatever we want. We can film with cameras whatever we need. We can have trackers in things, but it's, you can only track them for so far, and then actually half the time if they're slashing a curtain, once you've got an individual tracker on each pallet, you're not going to get anywhere with it, for example. So it's really one of these where it's the industries to fix, but also we need some legislative changes to support that. Is that a fair comment from because of consensus?
Yeah, I should think so. I mean, you're right. The damage isn't necessarily even just through the stolen load. I mean, I think you mentioned fuel is actually the commodity that's stolen most. But it's the damage to the vehicle. It can cost hundreds of pounds to fix a curtain slash. I've heard actually some of the safety tech and some of the ways that they can try and secure loads, they'll actually not use because the criminals will then cause greater damage trying to break through that thing. Then it's better to leave it open, and if they're going to come and take it, just let them take it, rather than try and put something on there to try and make it more secure. The best thing, we need to say more. We need more HGV parking. It's probably something if we haven't discussed it on the podcast, we will do it in some other point. We need many more HGV parking spaces for those parking up overnight. But those spaces then also need to be secure. And part of the issue is a truck stop pretty much now at the moment knows it's gonna be full. They have no commercial incentive to make the place secure. So we need to start bringing some competition there, have more sites that meet and then encourage them to meet that part mark freight or TAPA standard to give a driver a safe place to stop. It's probably one of the best things you can actually do to keep your load safe.
So again, moving on from that, so we'll talk about the actual true cost of freight crime. So notwithstanding, I think you made the point really well there, Nigel, that it's about, put the individual to one side, because that is the most important thing to me. The people should not, go to work and be subjected to that. None of us want that. Put that to one side. What is the actual cost to the business of freight crime when you think about it? So it's not just about the stealing of the goods. There's so many other read across. So what, other than those, what are the key areas that, how it can actually impact a haulier or a big supply chain?
I don't mind starting off. I think what the big message to the listeners is if you're subject to an offence or an incident, you need to report it into the police, report it to NAVSIS, report it to your bosses. It needs to get reported, because only by reporting do we start to understand the true scale of the issue. Now, the data that NAVSIS produces, and with Opal in the future, etc., we only know what we know. And so that's why it's so important. And people will talk about underreporting, but last year, NAVSIS collated 3,500 offences. But I'm sure there is far more out there. We rely on the reporting from police, insurers, businesses, and trade associations like the RHA. But the true scale of it is far greater. Looking at the cost of those offences last year, it was estimated at 65.1 million. But we need to factor in all those insurance costs, legal costs, vehicle repairs, the drain on police resources, loss of cargo, and cost to replace those damaged goods. And over a 5-year period, from 21 to 25, we estimate with those factors that multiply those costs, it to be in excess of 2.6 billion. And that's only what NAVSIS has collated through policing and their data collection. So I'm sure it is far greater, and the impact of a low value incident on a small to medium company could be catastrophic, because the trust and confidence with the customer is broken. Taking 1 or 2 vehicles off the road when they've only got a small fleet could impact them greatly, whereas a very large logistic company can absorb some of those costs. But it ultimately impacts on the economy, it impacts on the business and the trust and confidence in policing if there's no outcome or arrests made. So it's wide-ranging, the impact, and ultimately it impacts on the consumer and the public at large, because those costs will be absorbed elsewhere, and that's usually the costs that they pay at the counter.
I think that's an excellent summary, Nigel, and I wouldn't like to sit on a panel with you because you don't give everybody yell at it.
So, just literally, I'm about that. Sorry.
Oh, no, but that actually allows me as a nice segue to lead into sort of unpack a little bit of those areas a little bit more, if we can, Chris, from a driver, an industry knowledgeable person, expert, and obviously the developer of, Motorway. But it is what other areas, which one of those areas from a driver and an operator do you think is not the most important but the most challenging? For me, it's about reputation. So if I was an haulier and I was getting 2 or 3, totally out of my control, 2 or 3 thefts on a regular basis, I'd be thinking, well, nobody's going to be using me, because he's even big or small. I'd suggest on the bigger ones, it's just a big issue. I don't know which ones of those would you prioritise, is it?
In fairness, but I say Nigel's just stolen my complete thunder. In fairness, because I was I brought that up before. Is that and I've got pals who do run small hauliers, and I know obviously the larger hauliers, but even for the larger hauliers, we've discussed this for years, and I'm not going to obviously mention any company names, but the reporting issue has been such that in the freight crime security group that the RHA have run I've been a part of for the last probably 15 years, even the largest companies didn't want to sort of divulge what's happened to them, and they were the people that were asking, for everybody else to report the crime in the first place. This is why, when you report something via Roadway, but it is commercially sensitive. But if the larger hauliers, as Nigel so correctly said and stole from me, can absorb it, it's the smaller, it's not just necessarily a couple of vehicles off the road. It then turns into somebody's job, somebody's livelihood, and those smaller hauliers, who are investing, hundreds of thousands of pounds into equipment, it can turn on a sixpence, and all of a sudden all that's gone, and then inevitably, it is the consumer that pays for the majority of it at the end, because realistically, who else is paying for it? So go on.
If I can build on that, is that image of a larger company just absorbing it as a loss, just passing an insurer, not even then bothering to pass it to police, that has increased this perception that freight crime is always victimless, and it really isn't. You mentioned, Richard, the impact on a driver. and you, Chris, your story as well. When you're asleep in your cab, even if you do hear something going on, you don't know who's out there. You don't know what they've got with them. Yeah, you could be putting yourself in serious risk. You can't be asking drivers to be security guards on top of all the other things they're asking drivers to do. But then, there's that impact on small businesses, particularly those that have to absorb that cost, and often they can't. It does have that inflationary impact. It is absolutely not a victimless crime, and I think that's something we're making clearer and clearer nowadays.
Well, I think, one of the things for me as an ex-operator and is always, somebody put a post on social media a few weeks ago, actually, and it was really good about people, it used to be a third, the operating costs from the transport organisation, trucks, people, fuel, that was it roughly. But no, it's not, is it? You've got everything else that sits behind it. And ultimately, a pair of curtains, when I was operating £2.5 for a set of curtains, it's probably gone up now because that was 7 years ago. But if you have to have a new set of curtains on 3 trucks 5 times a month, you've got a big cost going there, and there's nobody paying for that. And it's, anti-slash curtains, when they were invented, remember that, it didn't work. And it's because it's organised crime, and it's villains that want to get in and do something, they will get in and do it, and it's what I remember a while ago, I've gone back many years, about 30 years ago, 35 now, when I'm in Newcastle, and somebody robbed me flat. And I was out at the time, I went back, and it's just this is not right. This is God.
So that's a really good analogy. But you didn't, when your flat got burgled, if you know it's a high crime area, or there's a burglar operating in the area, you shut your windows.
Yeah.
And I think there's some basic things that aren't being taken on board by hauliers because of the small margins that are involved in the industry. Ultimately, it's a community, and if it was a community suffering high crime, antisocial behaviour, police bring it together. Now, there's a really good community spirit within the industry, but there are some basic things that the hauliers and the businesses can do, and I know it's difficult because of those small margins. But things like, using those load seals on the trailers. If you've got a high value load, use monitored CCTV. Because it will, if it's monitored, it will alert that monitored CCTV will alert the police, and they can intercept that. And there's proven examples where it's been effective. So, what's the policies that the hauliers are using? Have they got a policy in place for business security? Standardising. We've got a high value load. We need to do this. They're speaking to the insurance companies. It's a holistic approach rather than looking at it in isolation. And each, and I know there's hundreds of thousands of journeys each day taking place, but it's about thinking, right, this load, it's particularly vulnerable. What are we going to do about it? That's a particularly dangerous route, parking area. What can we do about it? It's making it somehow policing industry. Motorway Buddy have got to work together to get those alerts out to the drivers, know where to park. The depots have got to be opening their doors, so we're not leaving those lorries out of there waiting and vulnerable. So it's a whole community approach to, and that will work. We can't just take it for granted. Oh, it's going to happen.
And I think, I'll come to you in 1 second, Chris. But I think I made the comment earlier on that we may have, tech kid out on this one. I actually think, picking up on that, if you look at it, the technology exists, for us to actually share that information and to actually track, collectively those vehicles. I'm talking if you open your mind to 5, 10, 15 years time, when you can book your truck onto an electric charging station 45 minutes before you arrive, all that sort of stuff. That technology will exist, and I think because it's neglected and not thought about freight crime, it's almost in some cases, and I'm not being criticising the industry, I'm part of the industry, because it's almost accepted that this will happen. If I don't park here, there's a good chance I'm going to get a problem. It's almost accepted that, and we have to accept as an industry that life has changed in the last 20 years. So I'm not being patronising anybody in the room or listening to us, and things have advanced. This is organised crime, technology advanced. They will know what you're going to do with that load before you know, probably. So you have to get smart with it, and I know it's a cost, I know it's a low margin industry, but ultimately, unless you change and they start to adapt that, it's going to be a real challenge in 5, 10 years' time, would be my position, which might sound a strange thing for me to say, leading the RHA, but it's a fact. And our job, this is why I appreciate the time this afternoon, is to support the industry on that journey, whether it be through the motorway buddy, whether it be through the Great Nav Sisters, whether it be through lobbying and campaigning. You know, and I think this is the first time. I'm quite excited about this in some ways, because I feel we're getting a traction behind this now. Yeah, we're starting to get it recognised. Chris,
No, all I was going to say is I don't think any driver goes out to be broken into. You know, nobody sets off in the morning to be attacked or to have the curtain slashed or to have the diesel. I mean, some might, but you know, largely, no, they don't. You know, and you see, drivers are helping themselves and helping one another in Facebook groups and stuff like that. You know, the diesel fairies, as they're so affectionately known, you know, maybe are affecting. But the problem is, you only see that for, you know, if it's a post on Facebook or any other social media, you only see that for a second. And it's only if you're actually fortunate enough to catch it, which is where, you know, we came up with the idea, because it's there and people can see it, and you need to take that away, and that, like I say, guilt, if you like. And I know loads of drivers, and the general consensus is no, they won't, like you were saying, no, they won't get out and attack anybody who's attacking them, because, you know, without getting too far into the finances of it all, for 25 quid a night, like you say, Ashton, you're not a security guard. No. You're hoping to God that, you know, you just want to be safe on the road. And if you can, back to the community thing, and I'm a firmly believer in it, you know, naive as it may be, but, you know, if I know something's happened and I can tell you, and that stops something happening to you and everybody else who's involved, and the more people that are putting in to like a freight crime community, if you like, the better it is for everybody, really. I'd have thought.
You're right. I mean, the drivers are a community. It's one of the good things about the job. You know, this is unfortunately, the risk of crime is one of the drawbacks, and it is one of the things that is negatively impacting our ability to recruit drivers. Long known in this country, we need many more HGV drivers, and even just to maintain the still levels of service we have now, we currently need 60,000 a year for the next 5 years. And that's just to keep things where they are. If the economy grows, it needs to be more. Who would take a job where you're going to be at such high levels of risk, you know?
Well, this is something else that sort of we put together, is that if the more reporting we get, and I was talking to Nigel about this before and previously, the more reporting we get, if everybody used a system like Motorway Buddy, it doesn't have to be Motorway Buddy, I'd prefer it if it was, but if everybody used a system, you would be able to see what all the freight crime was. Yeah. So there are two ways of looking at it. If everybody used it and there wasn't any freight crime, you could encourage people into this industry, which is a good industry, and, you know, a lot of people make a good living out of it, by saying, you know what, actually it's not as bad as everybody thinks. It's safe. You know, you know, don't listen to everything you hear on the news. You know, you're all right. The flip side to that, of course, is which I think we're probably all in a bit of agreement is that if you do report more, you can give it to people like Navsis. You can then give it to your guys further up the chain, and you can do something about it. So rather than just sitting there shouting, going, nobody does anything about it, nobody cares, nobody, you know, I'm not going to swear, done well so far, you know, nobody cares, then, you know, it's like, yes, we do, but you've got to help, you know, we have to help one another to get to this point, because like you said, there's not enough police. And I've been at RHADs before where they say it's the industry needs to help itself, and the more it does, the more the benefits will be reaped.
Okay, so just because we're coming towards, you know, I've got two more areas or two more questions I just do a collective view on, really, and probably just to confirm the points we've already covered. So just so we're all clear and sending the message to the listeners, from a government perspective, what are we asking for in the ideal world? So we've got the bill going through at the minute, that's fine. You know, well, it's not fine, that sounded quite blasé. You know, we need to get a classification. What's next? What else do we want? If you could have, let's put the question this way, if you could have two things, or one thing granted to you by the government specific, what would it be, Nigel?
What would you want? I didn't know you were coming to me straight away. I could talk about the supply chain risk industry partnership and Jane Meir with an NPCC lead. I think that would be part of the next question. Okay. I think we can go over the same ground, but it is definitely it is secure parking, and it's providing funding to improve parking up and down the country in the main arterial roads everywhere, It's about providing funding that is planned and it's prescribed as well. Particularly, so we know many offences occur at motorway service areas, and we need to be collaborating with the motorway service providers and the government to improve secure parking at motorway service areas, because that's where a lot of our drivers, our community park, and it needs to be not enforced, but there needs to be more collaboration there. That would make a significant impact in this area.
Chris, what about you?
Again, the easy answer is the facilities and more of them, but it's not. For years and years, I've worked with yourselves at the RHA. It's just not that straightforward. I think potentially, sort of more. If I say patrols, it sounds a little bit American, but sort of more eyes on the road of like you say, people who do go and keep half an eye on the sort of access to the CCTV, access to, I don't know, so police, if you like, in the evenings, because that's largely when these things happen, sort of keeping half an eye out for if there isn't or if there aren't available spaces in truck stops, you have to be on the in the lay-bys, and perhaps keeping more access to, more funds, I suppose, for the police than if to be able to, like I say, patrol the areas. I suppose it keeps people safer.
Ashton, anything different?
I'd agree with what they said, but a specific example. A lot of, when it comes to trying to get more facilities built, one of the biggest issues is the planning. There needs to be better planning for facilities more generally, but partly, security being a big part of it. Local authorities, in a minute, will find almost any reason they can to refuse the application for a new truck stop. Obviously, any truck stop that comes to the RHA and say, look, we're building something, will you support us? So I ask, is it going to be secure? Are you looking to meet that standard? If you're not going to meet that standard, we're not going to support it. But we've seen there's a truck stop that was proposed near Felixstowe, where we know it's a route where on the last lorry parking survey, the A14 between Felixstowe and Cambridge, they did a survey of the parking there, and it was 100% utilised. That literally every single space you could park a lorry, whether it's safely or otherwise, was taken. So it's an area that's desperate for more parking. Local council found some really spurious reasons to refuse it. So that's going into the process. That means it makes it more expensive to try and get these places built. They don't rake in a load of money as it goes. Like the whole logistics industry, it's a very low profit margin industry. But to even get a place built, you almost have to plan in the full appeal process right at the start. So changing the planning rules to make it easy to get these places built out it would make a huge step forward. And then, some more awareness and publicity from government would be great. We all seen, sort of those crime awareness campaigns that they put out. Why not one on freight crime? Because of how pervasive it is. Encourage people and they see, when a load's been slaughtered up, as the police call it, when it's been slaughtered and is being sold on some online marketplace, encourage people to think, okay, this looks a bit too good to be true. Could this have come from a stolen load? Anything which increases that awareness and increases the reporting, so we get that clearer picture of how serious it is, and then adequate resource we put in to finally bring it down.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple more areas, and I think you might have touched on, or about to touch on, Nigel, you might not have done. So where is it currently working well, what we do? Because there'll be areas where I'd imagine collectively what we're doing as an industry, what someone else says is working, Miss Marjorie. Where is it working well? Particularly around, the coordination and sharing of intelligence on a national, regional, whatever basis, and what more can we do in that area to develop it so it becomes more consistent and more of a deterrent or more of a solution? Does that make sense?
So I think there's key partners, including the RHA, Logistics UK, and other organisations, insurers, have worked together for many years to get this front and centre of Parliament with the freight crime bill. That's a win. The other really big win was the appointment of a National Police Chiefs Council lead,
Yeah.
Jay Meir. So it's been the subject of freight crime, cargo crime, has been extracted out of vehicle crime, and it's got a dedicated senior police lead to drive it forward. With Jay Meir being appointed, there's a national strategy. So she's only just in post, but we have moved forward significantly, and this will have a far-reaching impact positively. So in terms of policing, it will galvanise and coordinate the policing response up and down the country with a task and finish group, and focus its priorities with Opal, who are the national serious and organised acquisitive crime team. So they'll be working on those organised crime groups who are operating in this environment, working at that intelligence and working with forces to impact and disrupt those organised crime groups. You've also got the Supply Chain Risk Industry Partnership, which their mission is to prevent cargo theft and supply chain theft, disrupt these OCGs, and strengthen the resilience of UK logistics. So it's a clear mission, and within that there'll be a number of subgroups. There'll be good representation across the industry, but it's all geared to improving police response outcomes for those offenders involved in this criminality, and galvanising a cohesive response within industry. All the things that we've spoken about today, to try and get a clear strategy, clear messaging within each of those organisations, but also a clear message to the drivers. And within that, there'll be comms, and there'll be the welfare of drivers. So it's an all-encompassing strategy. It'll be a 4P strategy: pursue with the police, protect will be NAVSIS, bringing industry and policing together, and then prevent and prepare, preparing the industry to protect itself, preventing those offenders from re-offending. So it's a cohesive response, and we have moved forward. So it's exciting times. It will take some time, and within that, we brought in those big, very large organisations who have not necessarily reported in the past, and we're looking at other crime areas. But there is a cohesive response under the National Police Chief Council lead.
I share. It's one of my expressions, actually, exciting times. But I share that exciting times because I've been doing some work with the NPC on the big stuff, the abnormal loads. With Mark Clothier, who was the dedicated focus for that, and it works. So a message to the industry: we started 18 months ago to get the ACAPO guidelines reviewed, which have been reviewed for 14 years. They were reviewed, and now we've implemented the new guidelines, and we've got a 6-month review to see how it's going. So that collaboration between industry and the enforcement, and that understanding and sharing and messaging does work. So I think that is a really, really positive step. So I share your excitement on that one, and I'm sure Chris and Ashton, you do as well.
Yeah, like I said, it's been going on a long time, and the more and more, like I said, there's more people like Nigel who've been brought in, even if he does steal on the land.
I'm going to give you let you lead on the last questions.
Oh God, no, I'll happily go second. But no, it's the more and more you see sort of people. Somebody asked me once, "What do you want? What do you want from this?" And there's a similar sort of conversation, and I just said, I just want people to keep going. I want people to, because it's too easy to have these conversations and then feel like when you've actually got to the end of the conversation and feel like you've come to a solution, that's solved the problem, and it hasn't. What it's done is given you a solution to the problem that you then need to put into action to solve the problem. And as I say, the more I've worked with NAVSIS for over a decade, and the work that they do is fantastic. So the more people keep talking, the more we discuss, the more information we can be shared. Communication is absolutely key between all parties. We will. I don't use exciting times because I'm not that person, but I will on this occasion. I'll give you an exciting times.
That's good. I appreciate that. And I think, one of the things that, and again, Ashton, because I'm just going to close in a second, because Chris has run out of take. Yes. From an RHA perspective, just this is something that we're very passionate about, and again, along with other trade bodies and other key stakeholders, And the key thing is that, you know, it is about the collaboration part. And going back to your point, I think, you know, and Chris, because once we find something, we need to keep it moving. We've got to keep driving forward. You know, you never stand still, you know, because certainly with the people, you know, that do this type of behaviour and you know, and basically organised crime, there will always be one or two steps in front of you, more of your area of expertise than mine, Nigel. But that's my impression, you know, and you'll never beat him, you know, and so it's about minimising, you know, and preventing as much as you can, but also try to get one step in front of them, you know, and it's, when they say, what's the RHA doing? Are we doing enough? Can we do more? And that's the question for you, then Chris, and then Nigel at the end. And you can be as open, as honest as you want.
Well, it's really, this issue is, you know, probably the newest person to join and get into this issue, really, or everyone on the panel. It has been one of the things I've become so passionate about. So you asked me for 10, 20 years ago if I would spend most of my professional conversations and a large number of my private ones talking about freight crime and lorry parking. I wouldn't believe you. But again, just from talking to members, getting to understand the significance of the situation, how important it is, and how long this conversation has been going on for. I call it, it's almost like turning the oil tanker. You know, you make the order, but you need to keep that order.
The ultimate, can we do it? Give me a lot of his answers. Are we doing enough? Can we do that?
Don't nick my hands.
No. So, yeah, what we're doing, I'm say we continue our work with the all-party parliamentary group, the freight crime bill coming in. Again, it's great publicity, great chance to improve things. We're also finalising a open letter to the Prime Minister to call for more safe and secure facilities. I'm not sure when the podcast is going out, but I think we'll have officially announced it by then. We're going to have over 100 parliamentarians have signed that letter, a very clear political voice from industry, from politicians to those in government to say, this is important. We need to.
So we're doing the lobbying campaigning bit. That's are we in conjunction with other trade bodies? Moving on to you, Chris.
I was chatting with one of your colleagues actually before we started this, and I'm putting something together for him tomorrow, which he's really keen to sort of move forward on. Is that we create with, like say yourselves, other trade or trade associations, but to create the freight crime network essentially. So your guys, it's. There's, like you say, the margins in the industry are tiny, so this isn't something that's going to cost absolute fortunes. But it's if you've got, you said there's 8,000 members and the majority are SMEs, you're saving people's livelihoods by just telling one another what it is. And the more the RHA sort of ask, and again, I would like it to be through Motorway Buddy, obviously, but the more you sort of share this information and share what's happening and where it's happening to one another, the better it can be. And I think there is more that can be done. I mean, it's something I've been chatting to potentially you in the past, but not to this extent, that can be done. I think there can be more done there, but I also think it is being done. And I think that's kind of, we're at the very beginning of this process, as again, I've just spoken. But that's something that we will work on and work towards being better at, I think, more than, and you as trade associations and the RHA are a massive part of that.
8,500 to be exact.
I apologise.
Well, we don't count every day. Nigel, same question to you. What can we do as the RHA more than we're doing now? I've got an answer as well to this question.
So I think it's all about the members. It's all about the people on the streets, the community, and I think it's all right. It's all very well senior leaders and bosses talking and agreeing things. The people need to know. It's about communicating that message to them so they're aware of it. So we need to keep the momentum going. There's discussions about creating a national operational name. So for example, Operation Cargo. That will galvanise the message to drivers. So, I've got a curtain slashing, I've got a trailer hookup. You've got an Operation Cargo offence, so it makes it clear when they're talking to the police what they're dealing with. Yeah. To the police, instead of having various operational names for freight crime up and down the country with the forces, they've got one consistent Operation Cargo offence, and that ensures minimum standards of investigations and an appropriate, consistent policing response. with the Crown Prosecution Service, when they know it's an operation cargo offence, we're looking at those aggravating circumstances for increased sentencing, and general that consistency in all those various areas. That will be really key, and then communicating what's going on through the likes of Chris's application and the trade associations to the community, and that consistent message will be really impactful, because they'll think, well, nothing's happening at the moment, but we're fully aware of what is going on and making sure they're on that journey with everybody else.
I mean, I will say, and thanks for that, Nigel, is that you've stolen all my words now. So it's not just Chris. No. I think that's a really good summary. And the one thing I would say we're not doing as a trade association enough of. Do I know that the 8,500 members, do they know what to do if they get a curtain slashed and up a ring? Do they ring you? Probably don't even know your number. Not all of them, but some.
Yeah, true.
They ring us to tell us. That's the bit where we fail as a trade association, and we consistently do. And my colleagues in Logistics UK and Cold Chain and everyone else do as well. We've got to collectively work better together as the trade bodies, I think, to inform and be informed. And I think we need to keep pushing this point. And I love the idea of creating, I will call it a brand for this, because I'm a business person, so everything to me is a brand. So it's like the RHA. So if you had like Cargo Crime or Dateface, that's the name, that's the brand. So if we're talking about, because the one thing in this industry, as in life, is unless you will use a word which is the same word I'm using, but a different word. Unless we use a word that we all recognise, we don't know what it is, and you can waste so much time in faffing about, as I would call it, in thing. So I'm going to close now, and I have to say that was a really, really informative and interesting conversation. I do thank you, Nigel, Chris, and Ashton for joining us this afternoon on this podcast. And I think we'll be back in 12 months' time to give an update on this one, to pick up on the initiatives, but really to talk about what is acceptable in the industry and what we as a trade association, along with NAFSIS and everybody else, is doing about this. Thank you very much for your time.